Alright buddy, welcome back to another video. In this segment, as you can see from my shirt, I'm a Dreamcast fan. You've seen my prior videos. And one thing I want to take a look at is how the Dreamcast can be seen in other game systems, perhaps. So I had done a video earlier about comparing the Wii U and the Dreamcast. And one other system I wanted to compare it to, which I can see various similarities, is the PlayStation Vita. So going back, we'll take a look at some comparisons and some differences between the two systems and take a look to see as far as how much are they alike and how much are they different. And then I have another video coming up where we'll take a look and see as far as how much the Dreamcast can you find in a PlayStation Vita. So we'll start with this video first. So taking a look, both the systems have in common is that both the Dreamcast and the PlayStation Vita were considered commercial failures. So looking at the Dreamcast, we know the Dreamcast started off hot as one of the hottest systems to launch in history. However, it soon got steamrolled by the Sony PlayStation 2. One of the big items that Sony brought to the table to PlayStation 2 was the implementation of DVD functionality. So Sega later on decided to consider this, but it was already too late once they did that. When the Sony PS2 came out, it became the de facto DVD player throughout households all throughout the world. Because taking a look at DVD technology, it was brand new and the cost of a DVD player was pretty prohibitive. Now Sony had not only a game system built in that utilized the DVD functionality for its media to store even more game data on a single disc instead of trying to use multiple discs as we've seen in the PlayStation 1 days. It also became a common household item to watch DVD movies in better clarity, better visual fidelity, and better audio. So definitely as far as that was a huge selling point to where Sega could not compete with it, even though the games that were on the Dreamcast were some of the best games ever for their respective genres. So another thing too that led to it is poor brand management. So taking a look at Sega, they definitely had various missteps on their way till the time that Dreamcast came out. So, Genesis was a successful system for the 16-bit era. They tried to extend the longevity of it with other add-ons like the 32X and Sega CD. Even though they had brought some interesting ideas to the table, they were very costly add-ons. And when you take a look back as far as what they provided, the amount of gameplay based upon the investment, it ended up becoming a very poor investment. So definitely, poor brand management is definitely something that also Sony's responsible for. So taking a look at Sony with the Vita, they've not done a really good job with that. So Sony, they definitely decided to go with different areas, not really pushing the system as far as advertising, putting some of its best properties forward. So one of the big problems Sony had with the Vita is ultimately greed. So taking a look comparison-wise, based upon the same generation of handhelds, we have Nintendo 3DS. So, Sony decided to use their own proprietary memory card. We had seen the same thing with the PlayStation Portable. However, looking at the Vita, games became much larger than what we saw in the PSP days. And the issue too is that there wasn't such a big push as far as digital sales as we saw with the Vita. The Vita was competing with smartphones where the game marketplace was very commonplace. So downloading digital games became very commonplace. And so when Sony decided to put a huge markup with the proprietary memory cards on the Vita, it became a really big investment for gamers. While the Nintendo, the 3DS, used basic SD cards and micro SD cards later. So definitely your gaming dollar could go a lot further with a Nintendo product. Additionally, one thing Nintendo did, which was definitely, a big difference in comparison to Sony, was what they did when their system was not selling nearly as well. So Nintendo DS was a great success of a handheld. So the following 3DS didn't catch on nearly as well based upon the price point. So Nintendo's board of directors decided to cut across their salaries by 50% from the top all the way down to 20 to 30% was for some big game developers such as Shigeru Miyamoto. So not only did they do that for shame for the poor sales of the system, but they also slashed the price of the system to help generate sales. Sony had no interest in dropping the price of their game system. You definitely didn't see them dropping their salaries for it. And they definitely didn't do anything to try to earn gamer trust. So not only did Nintendo slash prices, But for the early adopters, they also implemented the ambassador system. So you ask, what's the ambassador system? So it was a huge token of goodwill to the early adopters who shelled out the money for the system, where they provided a heap of free games that were only available to them. So these were some, great games for the GBA and other systems, to where it was exclusive for these individuals, these early adopters, as long as they renewed it by a certain period of time. So it provided over $100 worth of gaming value to these early adopters. So Sony, you didn't see anything like that. They weren't providing any kind of goodwill for their early adopters, and they kind of just fell flat on their face. So another big issue, which is a little different from the commercial failure with the Dreamcast, so Sega was really behind the system 100%. They put forth a lot of software for their system, while the Vita, stark comparison, Sony's first party showed up very quickly. We saw Unit 13, a Killzone game. We saw Tearaway, additionally a Little Big Planet. Of course, a lot of these games were not developed in-house first party. These were shoved off to other developers to use their properties to make these games. We also saw an Uncharted game, which utilized a lot of the functionality of the Vita. So, and then we also saw that after the sales weren't nearly as good, they didn't try to do anything more with it, even though they had some stellar games. Killzone Mercenaries showed what a first-person shooter could be on the system with the proper backing and utilization of the technology they had built into the Vita. However, Sony decided they weren't going to put much into it. So another thing they both systems had in common was that they both were ahead of their time. So looking at the Dreamcast, it was the first console to really capture the online gameplay as being a built-in function. We saw soon after that Xbox followed suit with the original Xbox having a built-in modem. Later on with the PlayStation 2, eventually with time, you could buy an add-on network adapter. However, Sega, straight from the gate, was ready for online play, and they had a very good, healthy online game system with many of their hot titles, such as the 2K series. We saw Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, to name a few, as far as being big sellers. Additionally, the first console online RPG with Phantasy Star Online being a huge hit for the system. So definitely cutting edge software. The other thing too is that the Dreamcast probably was the first system to where not only did we see arcade perfection at home, we also saw games even better than their arcade counterparts, and that was based upon Sega's Naomi architecture. So Naomi was the hardware that Sega utilized for their arcade cabinets. The Dreamcast was built upon it, but only had less memory in comparison. So ports from the Naomi arcade to the Dreamcast were pretty simple. So for those who were into going to arcades and really wanted to capture that arcade experience at home, they had it all right there. Not taking anything away from prior game systems, but certainly as far as we're seeing games that looked better than what the arcade had for the two releases, the arcade and the home console ports. So we didn't really see that yet. Usually home consoles would show a stripped down version in comparison to the arcades, but now the tables had turned, and it was pretty surprising what they were able to do with the Dreamcast. We saw other developers who became really big about jumping on that bandwagon. So even though Sega, which was huge in the arcades and behind the Naomi architecture, we also saw Capcom and other third-party developers bring their games over to Dreamcast, which was really great to see. Another neat feature, which was ahead of its time, was the VMU, the Visual Memory Unit. So it had very limited memory. However, Sega did a great job as far as optimizing what the little VMU that plugged into the Dreamcast controller could do. It provided an additional screen, so seeing a secondary screen, it was far ahead of its time. We eventually saw things like that, such as connectivity with the Wii U pad and the Wii U, Smart Glass with the Xbox 360, the PlayStation Vita being used as a secondary screen for some PS4 games. However, Dreamcast did this, near the turn of the century. So definitely it was a new time for the Dreamcast back in '99, and so we were seeing some things that were well ahead of its time. The Vita definitely was not behind in any means whatsoever. So it was definitely had cutting edge graphics. The idea was to bring essentially PS3 quality in the palm of your hands. We saw some really interesting tech demos back in the days. Things like Metal Gear Solid 4, the Yakuza series being shown on the Vita. Unfortunately, we never did see Metal Gear Solid 4 or the Yakuza series on the Vita, but the tech demos really showed that in the right hands you can have some really great, amazing looking games, and so that definitely was apparent. We did see several PS2 games get ported over to the Vita with enhanced graphics and improvements. Games like Persona 4 Golden, Final Fantasy X, 10-2, we saw Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 brought over, polished up for the handheld system with some great optimization. So it was really neat being able to see what the Vita could do. It can still do. It was definitely a beautiful handheld. So comparatively, the best thing we had beforehand was the 3DS, which was its counterpart that was competing with Nintendo, and the PSP. And the Vita brought forth an OLED screen, which had gorgeous graphics for a time. Now later, as a cost-saving measure, Sony decided to implement what was LCD screen for the 2000 series. Even though comparable as far as graphics go, if you have an OLED, you look on the Reddit page, you have people who are, down with their original 1000 series with the OLED screen because of how beautiful it looked. So additionally too, you had 3G capabilities. Granted, that was locked to AT&T system, but we haven't seen anything since then as far as showing that implementation. So definitely it was ahead of its time. Another thing too, which is pretty fascinating, was how it was really able to implement a multi-generation of game systems in the handhelds. So we saw PlayStation mobile games, PlayStation 1 games, we saw some PS2 ports, PSP games, along with Vita games, all playable in the PlayStation Vita system, which was pretty amazing. We did see some backwards compatibility, 3DS able to play DS games, but we had essentially 3 generations all in the palm of your hand. So definitely a really great implementation. Definitely some great games to be able to take and play again. And so, one other thing that both systems had in common was the lack of third-party support. So back with the Dreamcast, we saw publishers like EA completely abandoning the system. EA had done a lot of game publishing on the Sega Saturn. However, when the Dreamcast came out, they were big proponents as far as Sega utilizing the 3DFX graphics chip. However, during the time of Dreamcast prototypes, they decided to go with the VR2 system, and so which utilized a different architecture. So ideally was that it was a far more refined system for its time, and so it would focus upon graphically as far as anything else in front of the character and nothing behind, while 3DFX and some of the other chipsets would still process imaging of things you couldn't even see. So it was not really utilizing the hardware to its optimum. And based upon the cost of systems and development, I think they went with a great choice. However, in the long run, they lost the support of EA and the Madden series, the NBA Live series, and the Medal of Honor series, which was pretty popular at the time, that we later would see those games and the James Bond series over in the PS2. So the Vita also saw, pretty poor support from third-party publishers. So Activision really had minimal impact as far as on the Vita. So we saw all of one Call of Duty game, we saw a SpongeBob game, and there's not a whole lot more that really comes to mind when you saw essentially annual installments of Call of Duty on home consoles, while the Vita had just Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified. Additionally, you saw other publishers such as EA. They put forth a Need for Speed game. They also published Madden 13, and they had a couple FIFA games, and then that was it. So a lot of other games that were coming over to home consoles never saw live day. There was no Medal of Honor game, even though we saw Medal of Honor games definitely released on the PSP. So one other thing that was talking about shooters is that both systems had a really lack of support for first-person shooters. So shooters as a whole, first-person, third-person shooters, we have not seen a whole lot of it for both those systems. The Dreamcast had Unreal Tournament, it had Quake 3, it had Outrigger, there was also Soldier of Fortune, as well as Kiss Psycho Circus. So definitely not a lot of shooters for the Dreamcast, and the Vita doesn't really fare very well. There was Unit 13, Call of Duty Black Ops Declassified, we had Resistance Burning Skies, Killzone Mercenaries, Borderlands 2, and for a brief period of time you could get Duke Nukem 3D as a digital-only purchase. So definitely not a whole lot of support considering how long the Vita's been out. So segueing that is that both the Dreamcast and the Vita ended up seeing huge support as far as from a robust homebrew hacking scene. So on the Dreamcast, you saw various emulators of other older home consoles. You saw ports of things like Doom, Wolfenstein 3D, Quake 1, Quake 2, to name a few, along with the great Beats of Rage and a host of other games. The Vita scene, we've seen it blown wide open. For if you take a look on the Reddit site as far as Vita hacking, there are all sorts of game translations of games not published in the United States, seeing Japanese games getting full game translations. We're seeing other games ported over, such as definitely the Quake games, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, to name a few. There's so many more. So definitely, as far as from a hacking perspective, both systems have been hacked open. Also opportunities as far as folks interested in programming to try to do something really interesting. There are new things coming out. Almost seems like on a monthly basis, something new coming out for the Vita these days. So definitely, they had that in common. However, differences for systems, there's some pretty substantial differences. So the Dreamcast, as I said beforehand, was fully supported by Sega. Because of the lack of third-party support, we saw a lot of games getting canceled left and right. Dreamcast came out, on fire back in September of '99, back in the United States, in North America, and then by time of winter 2000, Sega was already calling it quits because the writing was on the wall. They were hemorrhaging money, and we started seeing a trickle of, in 2001, of additional games. However, Sega was really the ones really supporting the system big time, with a few other smaller third parties putting forth their offerings. But huge support. While, as I said beforehand, Sony hardly did anything with the Vita. They pretty much left it up to third-party publishers, a lot of indie publishers putting a lot of digital content on the system, so seeing even fewer physical releases on the system, which was pretty much a shame. Definitely, as far as the Dreamcast, it wasn't really preceded by a successful system. Now the Saturn definitely didn't do well in North America. However, it did really well in Japan. However, overall, it was considered a commercial failure, and so they definitely didn't have their history on their corner going forward into the Dreamcast. However, Sony didn't do that bad with regards to its first handheld, the PlayStation Portable. They did have a misstep with the PSP Go. They're a little bit ahead of their time with that system. That was a pretty interesting idea. However, it's definitely, they had a successful system with the PSP. Granted, though, it didn't sell nearly as much as Nintendo DS. It sold quite a few. However, they decided to let their past success kind of just go limp going forward. Sony had too much. They thought that their name would carry them and they can overcharge customers, and they failed. And then their offerings, they didn't put forth their foot forward with regards to their releases. They could have definitely done a lot more, perhaps utilizing first-party properties being developed by first-party in-house development, instead of pushing it to other developers who didn't do nearly as good with some of their properties. And I think because they didn't do as well, we're not seeing sequels. There was one Killzone game for the PS4, and then it died. We see on the PS3 3 Killzone games. So definitely that's definitely easy example as far as it not doing all that well. And then end of life support definitely appeared to be far shorter for the Dreamcast. So Sony decided to call it quits, but we still keep seeing trickles of releases. Now that's definitely gone a lot less since late last year when Sony said that Vita cartridges were not going to be available in the West. We still see Vita games released out of Asia and Japan. However, with the Dreamcast, there were still a trickle of releases in Japan as far as physical, but after 2001, we really didn't see anything. And the reason for that, though, it's really because of the fact that Sega decided that they were not going to be in the hardware business anymore. They had to show that, hey, we're not going to be publishing software for our hardware. We need to put all of our attention to releasing content for the PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. So they essentially cut things pretty quickly. There was just a trickle near the end in 2001, and that was it. So, but we've still seen some ongoing releases from third-party publishers physically, in the West and definitely in the East for the Vita, even though Sony decided that they were not going to support it anymore. So those are a few comparisons. that I have for the two systems. I think both are great systems, even though it's definitely for different reasons. Great, hardware for a home console, but back in its time, the Dreamcast, and still looks gorgeous to play this day. And the Vita, there's a lot of games for it that look fantastic, even though we see, really great games coming out for the Nintendo Switch, but definitely the Vita's no slouch. So it's 2000. If you're contemplating picking a game system, take a look at the Vita. There's still lots of exclusives that are still stuck on the Vita that you can't find on any other handheld console. So hopefully you enjoyed the content. This is Kermit the Gaming Hermit, and take a look soon for my next video, which is going to show taking a look at the Dreamcast games on the Vita that we can hopefully play in 2020. Alright, thanks for stopping by. If you liked what you saw, click the bell to subscribe for notifications and also to be notified of future content. And please comment. Tell me what you thought about the Dreamcast, the Vita. If you thought there's things that I said were incorrect, or you think that you had an opinion regarding both systems. I think they're both great. Tell me what you think. If you think both systems are garbage and you're in the GameCube or Xbox or PS2 camp, or Nintendo 3DS and Switch camp. Either way, I think they're all great systems. They all provide some great content for all players. So, look forward to my next video. I'll see you later. Bye.